What is up? How are you? I am so excited for yet another video. I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and it's stretching me in ways that I didn't think I needed to, and I feel like it's strengthening skills that I have. Um, and what a great place to start with, addressing one of the biggest elephants in my own room related to anxiety, which I had no idea I had until I walked out of my therapist's office with the um, little receipt to turn into my insurance company that said I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and PTSD. And who would have thunk that all of those things I've been going through had a reason to protect me, to um, keep watch for me, kind of like a guard dog. I would assume that if the time of my life when I was feeling the most anxious were a dog, it would be like a Cane Corso or something like that, like cropped ears, cropped tail, and just like salivating at the gels because that's how it felt on the inside, like something constantly under attack that we needed protected. So if you can relate to that, comment below so I don't feel like I'm the only one here. But today, I'm in my second video of a series on a reset framework that I co-created with another therapist friend of mine. As we are moving into running a group program called the Reset Method, but I wanted to share more in depth about why what we do works, and this framework is a part of that. And so today we're talking about exploring the root, and the only way to get to the root is to understand a series of questions that I'm going to be asking, that you can pull out a journal and do yourself, but also just to normalize and recognize some of the stuff that as women, as high functioning, high achieving, go getting successful women, we fall into the trap of without even realizing. And then we make it something else that it's not, and become, allow that to become a part of our identity. And then there it goes, just repeating over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so there's oftentimes a question that I get asked, and I know that I asked it myself, and I'm sure that you've asked this question yourself to yourself or to your therapist, or you might have said it to your friend or your husband or your dog, since we're on the topic of dogs. But I know there were so many moments in my life where I would ask, like, why can't I calm down? I have tried everything. Why does this even keep happening no matter what I try? And it could be, that I've journaled, I've done the breath work, I've, checked my mindset, but why am I still so anxious? What is happening? Um, and so many women ask me this in my therapy session. I had one just bring it up last night. And it's like, why can't I calm down no matter what it is I do? And it's frustrating, right? Like, it's so frustrating. I oftentimes remember feeling like I am smart. I'm good at following through with tasks that I'm given. I am certain there is something on my camera that's just going to drive me nuts. Okay, there we go. I am certain that, like, I'm a smart, capable, able bodied woman that can take action on things. And yet, why can't I take action on this? What is happening? And for me, at least, I assumed that that meant there was something wrong with me, like I was broken. Now, obviously, after years of therapy and looking back on what I was struggling with, it wasn't that I was broken, and it wasn't that something was wrong with me. This was just what my body and my mind were trying to do to protect myself. And I couldn't fix that part unless I went back to where it started, how it started, where it came from. What sort of things was I experiencing, noticing, observing, and internalizing that I didn't have words for back then, that now, as that capable, able-bodied, intelligent woman that I am now, can go back and maybe create a little more understanding for. So I I know that this can be scary for people, but this isn't about digging into your traumas, digging into your history, going back and re experiencing things. It's about understanding, again, the younger part of you that had to develop some sort of storyline with the words and intellect and consciousness that you had back then to make sense of something that was going on. And oftentimes people think anxiety comes from trauma, like an observed, finger pointing, noticeable thing. But I have a handful of clients that come in that seemingly don't have trauma, but they have experiences that are challenging in the moment, the way that they perceive themselves, perceive their level of safety, and perceive what protection they need. And then anxiety comes in like a little fruit fly flying around to distract your attention until you can start focusing on something else. And in that, sequence of events, that distraction starts to become a pattern, which we're going to talk about later. It becomes a part of who you are. And then, here we are at age 25, 29, 32, 39, 45, coming to me and saying, I can't live like this anymore. So, the better question to ask yourself, instead of, why can't I calm down even though I've done all these things? What's wrong with me? I shouldn't be feeling this way. Everything's fine in life. So, why am I having this panic? Why am I so afraid to drive? Why am I so anxious to make sure I have a safe place to go? That's not the question. The question is, where did this begin? And how did I learn how to survive? Where did this begin? And how did I learn how to survive? It's not about digging for that trauma. Remember, you have to understand where you came from and what you do to survive, so that you can start reducing some of this blame that says you're doing something wrong, and internally the shame that comes from feeling like you should be doing something more. So these internalized rules that you create. And shame is a killer. Psychologically, shame comes from this place where the ego inside of you is saying that you're not doing enough or you should have done it better in some way. In the spiritual world, as a Christian, the devil comes in and tries to find those little holes where he can elicit shame into your spirit, so that the light that God intended you to use in life would be dimmed. And a lot of times, the women that I see struggling with anxiety most are the ones who have the biggest gift, the strongest purpose, um, and the most value to give out to others, that they just can't seem to get to because they're so enthralled with their internal chaos from anxiety. So, again, there was a time in my life after the panic attack that I had where I was in therapy, I was meditating, I was doing breath work, I was journaling, I was doing all of those things, but anxiety was still around. And it felt like no matter what I was doing, it was like I was still failing. I wasn't doing the things right, obviously, because anxiety wasn't going away. My hat is bothering me, or it's my hair, one of the two. I'm in like the mode of wearing glasses. I don't feel like being in contacts. I don't know if people that wear contacts a lot do that. And no, I don't want to get eye surgery because I like to style myself with glasses. Like, what's the point if I'm still going to wear glasses? Anyways, that's an aside. So, anyways, I felt like I was like being weak. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm not strong enough to overcome this? Like, I must be failing in some way. And so what did I do? I poured myself more into work. I poured myself more into distractions like relationships, going out, partying, like doing the things. And this isn't like in my early 20s. This was in my mid 30s post divorce, right? So I was single. I had this new sense of freedom. I was still grieving in a lot of ways, but not processing it correctly. And so I started to find myself in this place where it was like, what am I missing? Because none of what I'm doing is working. I was making great money. On the outside, everything looked amazing. I was going to the gym. I had a super healthy body and nothing was working. And then I started to map out my history. And suddenly it was like things started to make sense. And they started to make sense because I didn't realize now I have trauma, but I didn't realize that even after going to therapy and dealing with those things, that there was a part of me that was still feeling this need to protect, to survive, to make sure that I was taken care of and safe. And so my relief in understanding my history, I can't go back and fix that, right? I can't go back and like redo life. So I found more relief in the clarity that I gained from understanding not what happened to me, but what I had to do next after what happened to me, because it's what you do next after that moment of impact that's going to give you the most amount of clarity and help you start to understand the anxiety you experience and yourself a little bit more. I don't know if you've noticed this in my videos so far, but you will never hear me say your anxiety, my anxiety, because that is one thing that happens when this initial moment of impact occurs in your life where anxiety starts, is that we start to create a label of ourselves. We start to identify with this sense of anxiety. And that's not it. Like anxiety is a symptom, it is a physical, mental experience. It is not yours. It doesn't belong to you because symptoms come and go. Um, and so I just want to remember that like nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with your nervous system. Nothing is wrong with your mind. Nothing is wrong with who you are. This is just what had to happen because you were trying to protect yourself. And so that's really important, because when you're asking like, okay, well, I'm trying everything and nothing's working. Well, sometimes the trying in and of itself is part of the problem. We can't keep out fixing, out creating, out developing, out working our anxiousness. At some point you have to stop, because anxiety, it's not random. It's not happening at random. Oftentimes I will ask my clients, okay, so what was the initial thought you had? Well, I wasn't thinking anything. Not true. What was the initial feeling you had? Well, I just felt overwhelmed, as if like that's not enough. But it is, and that overwhelm has information. But when you push yourself through that feeling to the next distraction, the next box you have to check, or whatever it may be, then you're missing out on these opportunities to understand yourself a little bit more. So, here are some things that I want you to remember when it comes to discovering the root. Anxiety starts with nature, nurture, your identity, and your relationships. Nature, nurture, your identity, and relationships. Nature is going to teach you how safe you are. So if you experience circumstances in life that make you question your safety, anxiety comes in to protect you in some form. If the way that you are nurtured through your family, through your parents, through the adult in your life, grandparents, teacher, whoever it may be, that is a significant person, that's an adult in your life as a child, that nurturing plays into whether or not you will start to feel anxious. Hey, Ace, thank you. Dogs licking is probably my worst nightmare. I hate that sound. Your identity plays into anxiety because based on what you believe about yourself, based on who you believe yourself to be, anxiety either has more power or less power. Somebody who doesn't feel enough is obviously going to have, ouch, Ace, is obviously going to have a higher level of anxiety, because there is that hole that is being filled by other things to make you feel that way. Someone who feels like they're enough, who believes they're enough, who believes they're worthy, is not going to be seeking things that they feel need to protect them or overcompensate for things or whatever it may be, right? So your value, your self-worth plays a lot into the level of anxiety or intensity of anxiety that you may have. And then the last one is your relationships, how you attach. what you learn about your relationships as a child, what you're taught about relationships as a child, is a direct reflection of the intensity to with which you will have anxious symptoms, have anxiety. So, anxiety again is not your personality. We already hit on that. Please stop saying, I'm a perfectionist, I'm a people pleaser, I'm a procrastinator, I'm a this, I'm a that. Your brain is so complex that when you use those words, when they come out of your mouth, your brain says, oh, that's a part of who I am. No, that's a behavior. So please stop. Stop identifying with things that have become survival mechanisms for you. At some point, you will learn and you will feel that you don't have to survive anymore because your identity and who you are is strong, because the relationships that you develop are safe, and because the circumstances in life that you live in are made by choice because of you and what you want and what you desire for yourself from a healthy and healed place. Okay. So this is not a part of your personality. This is not a my anxiety thing. And it irks me. Like the amount of times I interrupt clients when they use the words, well, my anxiety, I say, nope, what is it? What's it called? The what? The what? So catch yourself, listen to your language because that's not serving you. The other thing to remember here is that these behaviors that you have are a set of patterns, a set of adaptations that your mind helped you to create to keep you safe. So again, going back to the root, that really nasty, rotten root that you're still thriving off of, it is keeping you presumably safe. But that safetiness is a very false sense of safety because you're doing it away where you're losing a part of yourself, you're burning yourself out, you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling depleted, you're giving way too much of yourself away, and you're probably making terribly poor choices like I did, like dating men who are emotionally unavailable or narcissistic or just unhealed in many ways, like, working 12, 14, 15 hours a day, saying yes to every single client that wanted to work with me when I knew in my gut that I should have said no, right? Like there are ways that we come out to reflect these adaptations in order to keep us safe. Money was a big fear of mine. Being lonely was a big fear of mine. Being rejected was a big fear of mine. Not being loved enough was a big fear of mine. And so I behaved out of those fears instead of out of a level of self-worth that I knew. When you react out of fear, you are going to do things much different than when you react out of a true sense of who you are and what you believe about yourself. The body learns to stay safe in these contained environments that are adapted. And so they work even when they don't serve you. So you heard me say, like, me being afraid of being rejected was that adaptation that had me shapeshift and people please and perform in order to get the type of men that I was attracted to like me back. But that worked because I had that first initial hit of feeling liked and wanted and desired. And then when I gave in to all of those things that happened in relationship, they would pull away. So it didn't serve me to behave in the way that I did to get what I wanted. So I want you to think about, like, what are the behaviors that you can recognize are adaptive behaviors that you think at some point were there to help keep you safe, but are now no longer working or serving you because at some point you hit a wall where they don't serve you, they don't work. The goal is to separate who you are from what you learned, right? So if you can separate who you are from what you learned, you will see the learned parts are behaviors and who you are is innately and forever a part of you. God created you as a beautiful, innocent little baby who was enough, who was worthy, who was important, who was valued, who was deserving, who was beautiful, who was smart, who was capable. That never changes. But because of what we had to adapt to, our behaviors made those things change because they changed what we thought about ourselves, reflective of what those behaviors look like. Everything we do is a reflection of what we believe. When you start to separate those two things, you will shift from shame to understanding and compassion and grace. Shame is a killer. Understanding, compassion, and grace are patient, kind, and loving. The patterns that you have based on that root lose power, and then you start to feel a little bit more yourself. That's what I love about looking at the root. Again, you don't have to go back to the experience. You just have to look at what happened, what was going on, what needs weren't being met, what parts of your safety were at risk in some way. So, my encouragement to you is to stop asking what's wrong. Nothing is wrong. Start asking, what am I feeling right now? And what are the ways that I adapt to protect me from having to deal with that feeling? That's going to give you more insight. And awareness, like I said in our first video, is always going to be step one. When you can become aware and you start seeing the patterns, that's going to give you power to start taking the next steps to look at what actually needs to happen to make the change. Anxiety starts to make sense when you understand those roots. For me, I went from being overly self-critical and self-blaming. And when I really started to understand the root cause, I started to give myself grace, and the way that I spoke to myself started to shift. And I became more kind and more patient as I was working towards breaking out of those behaviors where, I make a pizza and drive to a guy's work because I wanted to make sure he's still interested in me. Those sort of things. So I hope this video serves you. I hope that this series of these framework methods that I teach out of are a blessing to you. My name is Brianna Morse. I'm a 20 plus year licensed psychotherapist, and I am here to teach, to encourage, and to normalize that you are not alone in your anxiety journey, and that there are people like me out there who have been able to heal. It's so cool. I took this aside. I took this anxiety test. I can actually probably drop the link in here for you to take. And I assumed that I would still be like, I don't know, anxious avoidant maybe, because that's what I used to be. And I'm secure. Like, I am secure in my attachment now. And so what that tells me is that I have really started to heal my nervous system. And although sometimes the anxiety comes back, sometimes I get triggered and I can feel the nervous system go into panic mode. I don't have to be overran by it anymore. And that's what I know is possible for you. So share this with somebody that you love, that you want to encourage to heal. Share this with somebody who feels alone in their mental health journey. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more on this series called The Reset Method. Bye.